everybody. Thank you for joining HITRUST Secrets today. I'm Sue Richards, joined with Donna Knotson, Jeff McHugh, Steve Dufour, and a lot of us are kind of is it Dufour or Dufour? I'm sorry, I probably mispronounced your name.
Oh, you're good. Do four is
Okay.
fine.
Okay. And we've had Bill Deller on before, talking from Schneider Downs, and Patrick Kelly. Good to see you too. Welcome to HITRUST Secrets.
Thank you.
And this is really, we originally were going to have Gregory Webb on, but due to a scheduling conflict, as soon as we started like sending out all that information, he was like, "Oh, wait a minute." So he wanted to make sure he could give his full time and attention to this, and so we are working to schedule him on another session. So more to come. Stay tuned on that, but we will get it in triplicate before we send out the next one saying that he's on. But so thanks for joining. Does anybody want to kick it off? Does anybody have any questions specific to a high trust assessment they're going through? Anything like that? All right. So seeing none, definitely wanted to start with, this is the kind of that time of year where budgets are finalizing for 2026 and kind of looking to, what's coming up for them for the year and kind of that pre-planning mode. So just kind of was curious to see what anybody had as far as, what your outlook is on high trust certifications, whether it's for, your own company or if it's for clients that you have, depending on, what your experience level is with high trust, but open it up for comments.
So I can kick that off with some of the planning. I mean, obviously the assessment realm, getting your plans early and effectively mapped out is really important. As many of us know, High Trust takes those reservations in advance, especially if you're doing the larger assessments. So you've got to get on that schedule early. I do have people asking me, do they run out of reservations? Yes, they do. Make sure you make yours early. They do book up at certain times, so you want to make sure you get out there. But I hear a lot of conversations right now, and I don't know if this is because there are a collection at this point of very well established frameworks where organizations are picking their portfolio and they're making very intentional decisions about, do they align those assessments, do they scatter the assessments, and there are arguments for both. And I think that it's very interesting to look at how a strategy might work for one organization, and then a deliberate shift in that strategy actually works better for a different organization. And I don't know if anybody, Patrick and Bill, you might see people very deliberately kind of struggling with this type of a topic.
Yeah, I can add down in company. Nice to meet everybody else that I haven't yet. But harmonizing frameworks, requirements, and controls is a continuous effort. I would love to say there is, like you said, a clean and consistent way to do that. There's
Mhm.
not, right? Like it often depends on what systems they're using. And I think the best way that we've seen it work in order to harmonize and map various frameworks, controls, and timelines is to let the auditors get together and determine how they'll do that. Like those are our best relationships where there's a different external auditor for a different type of framework, and we coordinate through with them so that we say, hey, let's try to grab these things at the same time. Because it's
Mhm.
it's kind of in our all best interest anyway, because there will come a point where, our client's going to be like, well, can't you guys work together? If not, we're going to send all the work to one person, right?
It is. And I think that collaboration is really important because I absolutely see situations where organizations will say, well, they're entirely separate lists. And so it's too many things to do all at the same time. And where I have seen, a combined an efficiency on those lists, that tends to work really well. So where folks are thinking about doing, say, high trust and SOC 2, look at, joining those up together. Talk to your assessors. If your assessors aren't keen on that, chat around, because there are some that absolutely do this. And so, those are are really effective, especially if you're looking at smaller organizations where the number of people involved in an assessment is a sizable percentage of the people you employ. It's really important.
Well, and I think it's important not just for other compliance assessments, the traditional ones we think of as SOC 2 and ISO 27001, but also Sarbanes-Oxley or anything like
Mhm.
that. If you've got an enterprise risk assessment group to kind of partner with that, because a lot of times they're very similar, at least in some of the departments
Mhm.
and some of the evidence that you're gathering, it's very similar. And you don't want to have that, oh, hey, I'm here this month, and then somebody's going to be coming asking you exactly the same thing, but with a different list of evidence or maybe with slightly different terminology. And so, yeah, the more you can synthesize that together, it
Mhm.
definitely helps with the smooth running of the business because at the end of the day, we're not there, typically to run the business. We're there to make sure it's running effectively.
Yeah. And has anybody seen, so another situation that I've seen which throws a slight wrinkle in the alignment of all these things is where various assessments, including high trust, actually want to see that you're doing things beyond their own assessment. And so they want you to submit results from those other assessments. Now, to me, it seems a little counterintuitive for high trust because they consider themselves the gold standard. So why are they looking for somebody else's take on it? I'll leave that where it is, but I can see the value of having other perspectives. They're looking for pen tests, they're looking for, um, you know, demonstrations that other evaluations have taken place and that the business is actively engaging on these types of activities. So I think that is one of the things that I've seen shift that schedule a little bit is what types of evidence might we need from other types of activities going into these, which would make it useful not to run them at the same time, but to run them in a sequence. For what that's worth, I'll throw that out there for consideration and debate.
You have to say, I haven't seen that, but you do bring up a point as far as like with continuous monitoring or continuous assurance that the things that you do see that repeat cycle for, those are the ones that you're definitely going to want to automate first. Because as you try to get into that less manual intensive review, then, when you start seeing those patterns, I think that's really what you want to do. I haven't seen kind of that one after the other requests, but curious to see if anybody else has seen that. And I also haven't seen very many auditors asking for another audit report other than for third parties, but I haven't seen like an ISO auditor coming and going, let me see your SOC 2.
No, we haven't, but I have been in situations where that's been requested in the context of high trust, which, like I said, I found a little funny,
Huh.
but there it was. So they wanted just demonstration that there were other uh, compliance and evaluation activities going on, risk management, effectively.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
would it be like internal risk assessments and
Yeah,
that type
this
of
this
thing, or
was
really just any?
Yeah.
this was they wanted something deliberately that had been involving an external party. So
I'm
um,
I'm I'm wondering if they were trying to ensure that you're not just relying on high trust, right? Because high trust is only specific systems, not the entire organization. So maybe they want to see what the rest of the organization is doing, at least something, right?
Right. Yeah,
slightly different deviations of scope. Sorry, jump in.
no, no, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say it seems like and I can't think of the specific question, but that's almost like a control to give credit towards the organization's mindset, right? You're not just doing checkbox compliance, you're sort of trying
Yeah.
to build that out. So that could be, a reason to do that, but I do agree it is kind of funny to say we are the gold standard and what else are you
But
doing?
let's see what the silver people are doing.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I kind of ran into that with a HIPAA assessment where, and I actually clashed because it said, HIPAA's looking for an independent assessment, and I read external assessment. And the client I was working with at the time was like, no, we're independent of the practitioners. So we, as the internal audit group, consider ourselves independent. And so his take was if I'm doing the risk assessment, I'm independent of, I'm not embedded in. And I was like,
Mhm.
you know, gotcha on, you got me on that one. And I was like, okay. And I kept having to tell myself, independent doesn't mean external
Yeah.
necessarily. So that might have been it
And that's
too.
right. I've been in situations where I've sitting in a risk management compliance have actually reported up through the CFO, where information security was handled by the CIO, and so there was a separation of leadership among those domains. Having one domain be responsible for the evaluations that were actually decisions made by a different domain. So that there's absolutely merit to that, and that's often why you'll see uh, you know, a, an internal audit team or internal compliance team broken out and not reporting up through a CIO, but reporting through a COO or a CFO, just to get a little separation there. Fun
I like,
times.
yeah.
The things that get us excited for conversations. What else is on the roadmap for 2026? Anybody have business continuity, raising some interesting eyebrows after the past few days with AWS?
Yeah, I think so much for that. So many times that you go, oh well, we've got a cloud provider. We're using one of the big three. We're good. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, this past week hit, and you're like, whoa, well maybe I'm not so good.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I had about a half a dozen apps go down. I don't know about you folks.
Yeah, did you hear people's beds went wonky? So
Oh
like they have
yeah,
smart
they
beds.
woke up.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, so like I guess it connects to the servers and you can remotely manage it and all that other stuff. Kind of like when you hit that remote start button on your car, so you can remote cool your bed before you get
Yeah,
into it, right?
right.
So like they were stuck in the up position and got super hot, apparently. So
Amazing.
yeah.
I
Well,
have not heard that one yet.
yeah.
We did have some fun with school apps related to kids' schools, all of the
Yeah.
kids' schools.
Oh,
So there were different apps that were interrupted by that. I
what?
was trying to do my part. One call with their customer support, and I said, just out of curiosity, I started here so that it wasn't a long conversation. I said, "Are you as part of that, AWS expanded network?" And then he said, "Yes." And I said, "Right. So do I need to worry about anything?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Do you want me to share this on the parent chat so you get fewer calls?" And he said, "Yes, please."
Nice.
So I did my part for my public service announcement.
Well, here, this is not an advertisement. I promise. A friend of mine does software, and their WordPress sites never went down. So,
There you go.
because they were replicating between AWS and Amazon and every place else, so they're
Mhm.
replicated everywhere. If you have a WordPress site and you don't want it to go down, talk to me after this. So,
Okay. I found it very interesting too, because wasn't it, and jump in here if I've got the signals wrong, wasn't it one of the oldest established locations for AWS that went down, which, should have been
yeah.
one of the most mature, robust locations? Anyone?
What I can tell you is that AWS sites or access to AWS sites go down all the time.
Okay.
It's just bigger this week. That's all.
Yeah. I, I feel like it was an interesting week. Hard for us auditors to make friends, we say all the time, especially during these I told you so moments. But at the same time, I feel like we need them. Like we can only bark, redundant failover, extra, availability zones so many times until they kind of see it for themselves. And
Mhm.
for so long, people thought these big three CSPs are untouchable in terms of their controls. Like Azure's had exceptions in their SOC 2 report related to terminations now for years. It's like no one can do anything about it, right?
Right.
But
That's
it
right.
doesn't mean that they're not vulnerable. So
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And wait until somebody really wants to take them down.
Right. Absolutely. And this, brings up that question of when a system goes down, you know, what are those initial markers, and being able to collect and use that information as part of your incident reporting. It doesn't have to have been uncovered as a security incident for it to disrupt, you know, basically service agreements and, you know, your business, and potentially throw some markers up that you're going, is it a security incident? Is it not a security incident? Is it a distraction that's going to create a security incident? So there's a lot of questions that all make sense to answer. And for anybody who's going, well, we don't normally have security incidents, and you don't have anything to show your assessor, this is something you can put on the books. Do your investigation, do your evaluation, mark it up so that you're going through the same, you know, kind of channels that you would normally follow, that sequence of steps. And then you've gone through the process and you've got something on your log, and it turned out not to be a security incident, but it's a good path. So it kind of makes sure you've got the muscle memory that you're building.
Yeah, we often coach our clients because it's like so many of those controls end up being inconclusive. We usually just tell them to make it potential security incidents. That way
Mm-hmm.
they have a control to test it. Otherwise, yeah, a lot of them would never say it was truly ever an actual incident.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, there's
And the
probably fewer
evaluation of
tabletops. There's probably fewer tabletop exercises that need to happen this year. Now you're like, okay, well, good. 0 days since our last outage.
yeah. Yeah. But it's, you know, all of these things are very healthy to prove out those business continuity plans. For organizations that might have had some downtime over the past week, you know, don't take that just as the, oh, we failed. Things will happen. It's almost a guarantee. You know, it's the certainties in life beyond that things don't go as planned, which frankly I've made an entire career out of. You know, those are the types of things that we can use to prove out the risk management, you know, plans and philosophies. So here's what we thought we were going to do in this situation, but when it actually happened, or when we had a similar outage, what we discovered is that the phones for part of our customer support didn't work as planned because they were web-based, and that was run through this other thing. And, you know, then we couldn't get communications out to our clients, or we thought we were going to then, you know, basically communicate out on social media, but that in this rare circumstance happened to be connected to some app that was also supported by AWS. So that didn't work, you know. But looking at that and saying, well, if this was the outage, or if this was a bigger situation, how would those things have been handled?
Yeah, I can't imagine the customers that are on like Google or Azure going, "Hey, the AWS outage affected us." You're like, "But it did," because I mean, project scheduling software, like you said, some of the social media stuff, you know,
Mm-hmm.
customer communications, all of that was affected. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, I used to always wonder when I first started in GRC, I always used to wonder why business continuity was such a big part of information security. You know, it was like because you still, you know, it's one thing to run the business, but it's quite another to run the business securely while things are falling down around, you know, and just not go, okay, well, let's just unlock all the doors and, you know, do everything we can and start, you know, using personal emails or whatever to get the work done, but to recognize, yeah, we may have to slow down, we may have to go through some manual practices, there may be, you know, some additional steps that have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
We can proceed just more slowly as long as we're doing it securely.
Sure. And the outages can also push conversations around things like, if you did have a security incident and one of your options, a very likely option, was to take systems offline, because you could work on them faster, get them secured faster. What does your backup plan look like? Can your business run when you take those systems offline? And how can you guide your customers? What assurance can you provide to them about timelines for when you can get them back up? And you know, what time of day. So people oftentimes think about working days, think about your customers' working days. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's not. So, you know, really kind of pushing out that the color map on that to get a really robust picture of what that is actually going to look like in a real situation versus just on your very nice, organized, neatly written business continuity plan.
Well, and another aspect of it, because I know I had heard a lot of the fallout was, well, don't just assume that, regional distribution is enough. It's different availability zones. But in talking through that, you may have contractual limitations as far as how far away you can put that data as your second
Mhm.
source or your secondary site. So that's another consideration is to look at that, probably less so in the US because we have multiple availability zones within the continental US. But if you're in a smaller country,
Mhm.
you may run into some of that where you're like, well, I can't go,
Mhm.
beyond the constraints of the particular country that I'm operating in contractually.
Sure. And some of the state level folks will need to consider, if you're within a very localized healthcare system or hospital organization, I'm using those as an example, but uh, they're not prepared to have their data taken out of state. And so they may have selected a provider based on the location. And yes, there are backups. Are they approved? Are they pre-approved backups? And what happens then? If you look to some of the state ramp legislation, which I think is now called GovRamp, but the local state authorities, for example, Texas has TexRamp, and they're looking very specifically at those, at the data within the state. Once you get to a nationalized organization, there are much fewer concerns about that. But within the very state focused organizations, it can be a bit tricky if something's suddenly crossing state lines.
Yeah, because I know Illinois was very similar to that. I don't know if they still
Mhm.
are, but the data had to be contained within the state, and so
Mhm.
that's looking at it, going, okay, well maybe it's a cloud service provider and a colo or something
Mhm.
like that as your hybrid solution, as opposed to staying with one cloud provider.
Sure. And I'm going to use that to actually say this is one of those moments where you can look ahead to the assessments that you're planning for next year and think about what the business's strategy is. So if you're thinking about expanding to another state or across the regions or internationally, there are controls you can actually look at, especially if you've got MyCSF or HITRUST, you can work through some of the different changed data inputs, what your parameters are, and get the difference in controls. You can find out what are the controls you need to have in place in order to make that viable for your business. And looking ahead, this is where compliance can get really fun and actually help clear the path for business strategy. These are the moments where we can push out a little bit, making sure that the assessment deviation isn't too much. But if we push those controls out a little bit, it'll be a great moment to sit in a meeting where the board is debating, well, can we do this? And we were only in this one country to start with. And what if we go offshore? Well, can we do that because of HITRUST? And then you sit there and go, oh, yes, we're already prepared. We have the controls in place. Best moment. Best moment. I tell you, it's great.
I don't know. You lost me on compliance is fun. No.
Well, that's
I'm
just my
still
world.
I'm
That's how
still
I work.
thinking back to that. I'm like, wait. You lost me after that. No, no, I appreciate the enthusiasm. And yeah, I mean, I think, using this, even if you're not doing the told you so, but using it as a, well, how can I better prepare? How can I
Yeah,
use this as a, not as a scare tactic, but as a prep tool to
absolutely.
make
Absolutely.
sure,
And
yeah.
I didn't mean it to sound as if it was an I told you so, but more as if your path is clear. As a board, you can absolutely make this decision today if you want. There aren't any challenges with HITRUST because we've cleared the path. Anticipate where the business is going. If you know that you're going to increase or double the number of your employees in the next year, tick that up when you're looking at or increase the volume of clients you're working with or the volume of records you're working with, push those up and see where your controls fall because you can clear that path ahead of time. And then it's just so much easier.
Yeah. True. Switching gears just a little bit, thinking through on CMMC, because I know
Mhm.
we talked about that this summer, and I was um, very limited
Uh,
in my knowledge of CMMC, and I was wondering why nobody was panicking about it because the government has put a deadline in, and why is nobody like sounding the alarm? And I think most companies are looking at level one, which is a very limited number of controls, and it's a self-attestation. But I was just wondering, for 2026, I'm assuming that most of these people have cleared that hurdle or starting to that in 2025 because that's really level one is really that beginning this year. So is anybody making plans for CMMC in 2026, level one or jumping to level two or three? Anybody seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, I can share we're a C3PAO for CMMC. We're definitely seeing a lot of people make the jump. It's going to get delayed for as long as the government shutdown, and maybe longer until we see it, that the cause number is escaping me come to fruition. But it is a matter of time. To us, it's still a ticking time bomb, but I can say, there are dozens of folks a month that are seeing the light that it's going to come to fruition and they need to prepare for it.
and
So are
are
they
those
starting with
people
level
are
one?
oh sorry, Susan, go
No, it's
ahead.
okay.
Not all of them.
No?
No, no. Some of them are just jumping right into like the readiness assessment, if you will, and
Okay.
then preparing for level two and according.
And are these only people who are working, who have established direct contracts with the government, or could it be people who are working with organizations that take government funding, right? So if I have a contract, for example, with a university teaching hospital in a given state, and I don't realize that they are partially government funded, and suddenly would I'm using that as an example because that's oftentimes how local state data privacy legislation sneaks up on some of the companies. But I don't know how that, is CMMC, do you always have visibility on it or can it sneak up?
Yeah, for us, I guess it still depends, kind of a tough answer, but um, it still comes back to the contractual requirements
Mhm.
for folks and what their organizational risk appetite is. But I can say, like, we had a higher ed client of ours come to us this morning and say they think they're going to need CMMC certification,
Mhm.
but mostly due to their research and development departments.
Mhm.
So it's all about the CUI. Um, and ultimately, we're seeing it across the spectrum. If they're processing CUI, whether it's a direct contract on behalf of the government or not, we're seeing it in both cases, right? Based off of the folks with less risk appetite, um, that don't have direct contracts, they're still doing it in certain cases too, because they kind of think it's coming one way or another.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's going to be kind of become the minimum standard, to just say, well, hey, if you want to do business in the US, at least get this kind of like, NIST has always been kind of that standard that you fall into, or, would maybe you don't have a client now, but you will have one. And so therefore you want to kind of prepare yourself.
Bye, Bill. Thanks for joining.
So,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works. Now, CMMC, is that similar where they don't have the same robust, I've often talked about the government frameworks not having the same robust third-party evaluations and, looking at clear security metrics throughout their supply chain, because with the government, you can't really delegate. The government wants to know who it's working with. Uh, so I don't know if you've got any extension to share on that level.
I don't at this point. I know level one is a very limited set of controls. I don't know if it's also looking supply chain. I would assume there's some part
Mhm.
of it that's a supply chain type of concern in there as well. Similar to the CIS,
Mhm.
their benchmarks and all of that. I mean, level one is basically like a PCI self attestation where you're just
Mhm.
like, hey, I've got these, but I would still, similar to when OCR for a healthcare organization was sending out surveys and they're saying, do you do this? Well, you don't just answer the question, you also make sure you have the evidence so that in case they do follow up and say, oh, okay, proof that you're doing this, that
Mhm.
you have that ready to go. Level
Mhm.
two is still, it's more controls, but it's still self-assessment. And then level three is getting a third party involved, like Bill's organization.
Sure. Is there what's the, beyond having it in a contract where the government says we want you to meet these requirements, what are the other benefits to it? Does it have a strong security,
I think
culture?
it's
Is it
just
better than
government
high
says,
trust or SOC 2?
requirement.
no, I think it's just the government. If you want to do business with the government, if you want to be considered for any contracts, you need to
Okay.
at least say, I've got these rudimentary things in place.
Hmm. So we wouldn't
And
be looking for anybody to swap out what they're doing right now for the CMMC as a full replacement in most situations.
I don't think so. No, I think this is just a way to kind of bring the level to at least a minimum standard. That's why I was wondering if it would become, well, you could at least get CMMC level one,
Mhm.
and have it kind of be, and I think that may be where like High Trust put in with the E1, so that you can
Mhm.
kind of get to that point at some point where you're like, well, if you're a healthcare organization or you're a business associate in the healthcare space, you at least have to have an E1. I
Mhm.
don't think we're there yet because the market hasn't demanded that yet. But I'm wondering if, because of the scope of the government, if that would become in the U.S., that
Sure.
that's your minimum operating standard to be considered, whether it's government work or not.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Just looking forward to 2026. But
That's
yeah,
good.
and for me, I mean, I know there's a lot of companies that are going through the high trust assessments in 2025. And then so if they're
Mhm.
doing an R2, their interim assessment will be in 2026. But I always think of, math problems as, you solve it the first time and then you go back through and you figure out how to be more efficient in solving
Mhm.
the problem. And so to me, that's where I'm looking at all that automation, working with some of those third party tools that promise continuous monitoring and the continuous auditing type of thing. And so
Mhm.
my focus is really to dive into some of those tools and just kind of see, well, how does that work and how much of it
Mhm.
is automated versus, manual review and,
Yeah,
and things like that. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I haven't, I'm still looking. I'm still doing a lot of reviews, but of information that I see at conferences and online, I haven't seen anything that blows my socks off yet, but I might be fairly demanding.
well, I mean, I kind of am because with AI, I'm kind of looking at some of these automated platforms and saying, well, okay, if I add a new control, if it's even my custom control, why can't I have an AI assistant pop that into my policy for me and
Mhm.
highlight it, but word it correctly, as opposed to just relying on their standard policy templates. How
Mhm.
hard would that be? And so far, I've not found that. It's no, you would have to manually update your policy with the control that you've added. And I
Mhm.
was like, okay, well, I can do that, like you said, in SharePoint.
Mhm.
My SharePoint bandwagon.
Exactly. And I probably have Copilot help me with it, versus paying for
Yes,
for a tool that are going to go, no, no, you created this manual control, you figure out how to add it to the
indeed.
policy.
Indeed, it had for if I've got to pay extra for it or buy something separate, it has to blow my socks off over and above what SharePoint offers because so many companies already have SharePoint in-house. It's already part of what they're paying for, so it has to do more than SharePoint.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's got the workflows, it's got the document repositories, but yeah, where else is that? I mean, and there's some that have the good integration. So if you're working with a lot of
Mhm.
these industry standard tools, there's a lot of good integrations with an HRIS system and things like that. So, in
Mhm.
that respect, there's probably power that I'm not tapping into with
Hmm.
this. But in the realm of what has always been a manual task for me, I'm not finding a non-manual task yet.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But more to come on that. One of the things I have been, because I know we talked about before about AI and how we're using it. One of the things I found was interesting. First off, how many people are updating their policies to include some sort of AI
Hmm.
restrictions? And the first thing is obviously asking your leadership, well, what are the restrictions? Can we use AI? Can we use
Hmm.
it, not use it at all? Can we use it, just not put, private information in it? If IT, and I think I told you that I yelled at the Microsoft person last year because they introduced Copilot as an AI tool, and just there it was. And I was like, why are you letting end users add Copilot to Teams and all these things? And IT hasn't had a chance to vet how secure that is,
Hmm.
And so curious to see, if people are putting restrictions in for Copilot or any of those, tools
Hmm.
that kind of augment what they already have with their office productivity tools.
Yeah. Yeah, it's most of the folks that I've spoken with seem fairly confident based on what Microsoft has told them about how the security in Copilot is structured. Uh, I I think it's probably somewhere in between the Microsoft selling spiel and you know completely unsecure. It's somewhere in there, and I think it's probably improving day by day. But it'll be interesting to see whether or not we get all the way through 2026 without some sort of uh, an internal data breach of sorts, where HR used the system for end of year reviews or something, and that somehow accidentally got shared with
Everything's
the entire organization.
exactly.
Wages, compensation packages, who was getting promoted, who wasn't, feedback from managers. I mean, this is it's a hot ball of wax when you get to that point.
I have a friend who refers to AI as asbestos. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, and
Hmm.
it serves a purpose, but sometimes it's really, really dangerous.
It is.
Well, and that's one of the things that I've added to the policy documents, like for an acceptable use policy, is not only don't put the private information in, which is kind of what I would always start as my standard, but now also don't rely on the content that it spits back because it may be incorrect. It may have bias in it that, you're not aware of. And or it may just, be completely incorrect. And
Hmm.
so, don't look for it to render a legal opinion. Make sure you still vet that with your legal counsel and things like
Hmm.
that. So, I mean, it's not just be careful what you put into it. It's also be careful what you get out of it,
Hmm.
in that acceptable use policy. So I think that's, helping to shape some of it. Whether anybody reads the acceptable use policy or not, I don't know, but at least it'll be in there as a thoughtful footnote.
It's one of the things you have to keep in mind whenever you're doing your vendor reviews for third-party risk management. So I'm about to paste to you guys. Oh, it said that I went over my word count, so you only get partial. So let's go ahead and do it in two sections. There you go.
Ooh, what's this? Lots
These
of
are
fun here.
questions to ask your vendor if they have AI somewhere in there, either as the product itself or somewhere on the back end. So it's not always transparent exactly where the AI is, right? So if it's not part of their product, I bet it's part of their workflow somewhere, right? And
Okay.
so one thing to keep in mind is there are, let's not call them co-pilots, let's just say like assistants for cloud service providers, where the infrastructure team can check a box to enable that thing, right? Now, I'm not saying it has access to tenant data, it's just another use of AI that your third parties have to account for. So these
Mhm.
9 questions are ones that I ask my AI empowered third parties? And a lot of them can't
Yeah.
answer it because the question isn't appropriate to their particular use case. So, number three is very important. It's about money.
Ah,
So the token utilization portion of it is how these AI companies make money. So, for example, if you're investigating a contract management system, and so their big thing is, okay, you can upload your contracts here, you can have red lines and like collaboration in one place. We'll have AI analyze the document and make suggestions. That's not free, right? Like you're
Hmm.
paying for the product itself, and at the same time, you might have a quota of how often you can use the AI
Hmm.
tool, or you might be billed per document per scan of the AI, right? So
Yep.
stuff
Mhm.
like that to just keep in
Hmm.
mind. And so as you're evaluating your vendors, I use these 9 questions to see how mature their model is as far as AI goes. Feel free to use
Sure.
it.
Thank you.
Thank
perfect.
I
you.
also
Yeah.
think it's interesting where, so at ISSA, when I was speaking with some of the different AI vendors, a lot of them are making strides, in and around security of data that goes in so that they can start um, helping their clients and the people they're pitching to manage that a little bit. And uh, one of the things that one of the questions that I asked that seemed to throw folks a bit was, they would talk about, yes, well, if somebody puts in a document, AI is trained to recognize the document. I said, well, what if they don't put in the whole thing? What if they put in a paragraph? And, they're working through, say, an annual report. They're not putting in the whole annual report. They're putting in this paragraph or that paragraph or this other paragraph. But if you put it all together, it's just enough to pull some information that might not have been shared with shareholders just yet.
Yeah, good point.
So that seemed to have people pausing just a little bit more in a good way, because I think a lot of the AI tools are really impressive. And so the thing we have to navigate at the moment is how we figure out the security parameters. I think it will be figured out. I'm not confident we're quite there yet, but I do think we will figure it out.
Hmm. Hmm. That's an interesting problem. Huh.
It's this is one of the challenges that it's not unique to AI. A lot
Mhm.
of, technical products and creation think back to, yes, I'm going to come up with this great thing, but then they haven't actually had a user sit there and, you know, try it out. Because I can't think of the last time I tried to put a whole document in something. I tend to do, right, okay, I'm just going to do this little clip content or this clip content, or I need to figure out this, I've got most of this, but I need to figure out this bit. And so for me, it's the smaller content segments. That's how I would use it. I don't know how everybody else use it. Maybe I'm the only one in the world, so they don't need to
Hmm.
solve for that. But
Okay.
this is where I think a lot of the folks have, I feel like it's almost been a step away from user acceptance testing, right? It's not as much anymore. I don't know. It feels like 15 or 20 years ago, there was a whole lot more of user acceptance testing going on before things actually hit the street. I'm not saying there's no testing, to be
Yeah.
clear, but it's not the same where we're writing out scripts and going, oh, okay, right. Well, just bang on this bit and see what happens. What would you do with it? How would you use it in your daily work? What happens then? And really engaging users in things that the development team or creative team didn't think about.
Well, there's that video where they have the QA person there's like all these different shapes, and the QA
Mm-hmm.
person is going, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait for these people to test it." And then the person puts the circle in the square, and they put the square in the square, and they put the triangle in the square, and because everything fits in the square. And they're like, "No, you're supposed to put the circle in the circle shape," and and it was like, well, that's not that's not the way I
Yeah.
wanted to use it because this was way more convenient that the square is big enough to fit it all. So,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and that's always that happy path of testing versus, like you said, just kind of hand it to somebody that has no experience and go, okay, here's the task I want you to complete.
Hmm.
That was what we always
Yeah.
would do if for user acceptance or for a user interface would be like you just give it to your grandma or somebody that couldn't, was not technologically sound and
Yeah.
just be like, okay, make a bank withdrawal, and
Yeah.
have them kind of
Or do
figure
you
it
know
out.
what to do on the screen? Do you know where to
Right.
go? Where's your
Right.
eye going? And,
Yeah.
what are you drawn to? What's the process that you feel like this is where you should go? Um, Way back early on in my career, I was doing we were very excited because we were converting a system from weekly batch updates to daily batch updates. Very big situation. And so it had to do we had to go through a different interface and we had to, batch the data and stuff. So I'm very excited. I'm, leading the effort from a product management side on designing the interface for the customer support team. So we framed it out. It wasn't complete, but we framed it out. And I drove out to my customer support folks and I said, "Oh, great! I want to show you what I've been working on. Get along with these folks really well." So I get to the end of my presentation, and they just kind of paused. I've done something wrong. And what one of the older women says to me, "Oh, sweetie, this looks really nice." She said, "You used a mouse through the entire presentation." She said, what order are the fields in?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, I would never use a mouse. It takes too long and we're timed on our calls." So it was, I needed it all in tab sequence. The fields needed to go in the exact order that she would normally walk through them in her call scripts in order to actually deliver a significant value for them. Otherwise, they weren't going to be able to use the system because all their call times were going to go up exponentially. That, the stats were going to go not good. And
Hmm.
it was in that moment where I was talking to people and showing people who were actually going to use the system and them going, "Well, that's great, but that's not how we use it."
Uh-huh.
And it was awesome because we got a chance to course correct before we
Hmm.
actually launched. And it was, when I spoke with the developers, he said, what do you mean the order? And I explained the whole thing. He goes, "Oh yeah, I can do that." I said, "Great, let's do it." But that was a great experience for me at that
Hmm.
early on point in my career because it really was influential about how it influenced me to really pay attention to who's using the system and what they're doing, not just how I think it should be done, because I have my own way of doing things, in case you haven't noticed. But there's, my way of doing things, and then there's how, the rest of the world operates.
Yes. I was a product manager and I loved it. I learned a ton. I don't know that I would go back to doing that, but it was a good
It's
job.
hard. It's tricky.
Yeah.
Was it product management in the SaaS realm?
Software,
Tech?
yes.
Yeah.
Software, yeah. And
Yeah.
in fact, it was old-fashioned mainframe job scheduling. That was 20 years ago though. So
I love a good mainframe. I miss mainframe. You could slice
Mhm.
and dice data like there was no tomorrow. I want
And
to
it
go to
never
byte
went down.
5,
Yeah,
just byte 5.
Well,
never goes down.
funny anecdote. I was out in Colorado, and there's a lot of toll roads out there, and we were renting a car, and so didn't want to get caught unawares with the toll roads. So created an account with their toll operator in Colorado, and just wanted to add the rental car because I'm like, I'm not going to be here again, but or if I am, it's going to be years from now. And it wouldn't let me create except for my own car. I had to get the license plate of one of the cars that I own. And so then I was like, okay, I did that. And then I was like, all right, well, let me now add the rental car, to it. And there was a drop down at the very bottom of the screen that was like, okay, well, what's your primary car? And that drop down screen was empty because it just, I guess, because I just created the account. So I said to my husband, I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to try because, of course, it's a government program, so it's customer service is only Monday through Friday, and this was like Friday at 8 o'clock at night. So I'm like, okay, I'll say Saturday and Sunday that it's not going to have anybody I can call. So I was like, well, let me just wait till tomorrow. So I was like, well, don't take any toll roads Friday night into Saturday morning. Let me log back on Saturday morning. And sure enough, there it was. And I said, I bet it was a batch job that that ran
Old
overnight
school,
to establish
old
that. Yeah,
school.
that I was like, and I told my husband, I was like, I gave it like a 40% chance that that would actually work, but oh my gosh, it worked. So we were then, as of Saturday morning, able to use the toll roads.
Great.
Ah, that's funny. I
Nice.
find it very funny. There are some, even some of the banks. Some of the banks are
Hmm.
the you'll have a more modern bank, a digital bank. I don't know if anybody's worked with Monzo in the UK. I mean, that stuff is fast. It's fast going from one account to another, that are not connected accounts. That transaction, you can see the funds leave one and arrive at another within a span of 2, 3 minutes. It's ridiculously fast. And then over here, if you send something, from a more traditional bank that happens to have an interface, it's you're looking at it and it might arrive like the next day or the day after. It depends if they can kick off your transaction today.
Right.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
I'm
By
looking at
4
this
Right.
p.m.
going,
And yeah, exactly.
okay, this can't be just a security issue, right? Because the security for the UK and the US when it comes to financials, I haven't worked in the financial industry in these areas, so I'm speaking uninformed on that, but it doesn't feel that different from a consumer perspective.
Yeah.
Anybody have any
Yeah.
insight on that?
I think because I used to work at Comdata before it became part of FleetCor, and it was just the volume of transactions. They had mini computers. They had an AS400,
Mhm.
and it was basically just because of the volume of transactions, they didn't want to get rid of what was working because to them,
Okay.
a web-based SaaS model was going to be slow just
Mhm.
because of the billions of transactions per hour that they were doing.
Sure.
And so I had actually this was probably 15, 20 years ago. I had actually talked to some relatively young developers who were all about Scrum and Agile and all that. And I said, you know what, learn COBOL because these systems, the people that are maintaining them right now are ready to retire. And you will be able to write your ticket in 5 years because
Mhm.
all these people that are, late 50s, early 60s are not going to want to keep doing COBOL programming. They're going to want to go off to, their garden in
Fiji.
Florida or whatever, yeah, Fiji. And
Hmm.
so I mean I don't know because I haven't worked, at Comdata for forever now, but that was really the big thing. I was like, well, come on, I'm a web developer. This is web is the thing, and they're like, it's not fast enough. And
Mhm.
so that was the thinking behind it was we need that speed, and mainframe computers are what gives you that speed. So it's that batch job, and they could,
Mhm.
like you said, go from a weekly batch job to a daily batch job, and then
Mhm.
maybe twice a day, but they were not going to try to go any faster than that.
Sure. And it's hard because you've got so many existing, this is where I think even the security questionnaires fall into this. Well, we have this process and nobody wants to let go of the process, even though we know it's kind of old and obscure and probably doesn't do as well as it should. But if you let go of the existing process and you go to something new and there's an issue, and let's be real, in the world of
Always
cybersecurity,
is.
you're almost guaranteed an issue. It's just a matter of when and how big. And nobody wants to let go because then they could be blamed for something. And the
Right.
reality is, the manual questionnaire is like, I could sit there and answer all the questions. It doesn't mean anything. This is where, if I answered, half a dozen of them in ways that raised red flags, but then on a couple of others that I wasn't sure about, I just put something that I knew wouldn't raise a red flag. They're not looking in the right spot for the security issues. Those are
Yeah.
concerning. I'm not saying I do that. I don't do that. To be clear, it's,
No, but
it's
I mean, I
strictly
think
hypothetical.
I think something like that, the mindset has always been there's one computer, when you're in a mainframe. And so the distributed model just would blow your mind, to
Mhm.
have there's thousands of little computers out there doing that high volume work,
Mhm.
which is safer because it's not just one point of entry, one point of failure. But I think it was getting through that mindset to say, well, okay, yeah, one website is going to be slower than a mainframe, but 1,000 websites distributing that load is actually going to be more robust and resilient than that
Sure.
one. But
Sure. TSB might have been better off if you were on their team. So TSB is a UK bank. I don't know if anybody else got wind of this. This was, gosh, it's got to be probably nearly a decade ago at this point. But they did some sort of, it was an intern, it wasn't a security issue. Well, not to start with, it was caused by an update, a very well-intentioned update that they rolled out, had no rollback plan for, and they the result was catastrophic for them, to the point where a year later they still couldn't take on new customers because it was so bad. People's accounts were frozen, not just for a few days, for weeks. They had accounts frozen. People's rent wasn't getting paid. They couldn't get access to their funds. People would log on and they were looking at other people's accounts. Very bad, very bad. So
Yeah.
there were things, we were getting ready to do something at work, and I said, well, I just want to make sure we're doing a few QA things. I said, healthcare data, all that. We have all these accounts. I said, just want to make sure that we're going to not miss the step where we log on to make sure, at least in spot checking, that this account, my credentials for this account lead to this account. My credentials for this account lead to this account. And we've got a rollback plan. I said, let's not be TSB. We can learn from others.
Exactly.
But it's hard, and my heart goes out to that team, because I'm sure there were people who lost their jobs over that. But it was a year and a half later, and you could walk into a branch and still be told, we'll get in touch with you. They couldn't open an
wow.
account.
Yikes.
Crazy.
It is.
Anyway, that just about brings us to the top of the hour.
Say, on that happy note, everybody's worst nightmare. Let's not do that. But as soon as
it's Halloween.
I know.
That's right.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next HITRUST Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real-world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your HITRUST journey.